All right, so thank you once again for joining us for the Intro to the Super Circular webinar. Today is October 16th, 2014. This is a resource of the Administration for Native Americans being presented by the Pacific Region TTA Center. And so the Pacific Region TTA Center, or Training and Technical Assistance Center, is based in Pearl City on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. And we help offer training and technical assistance to all of the Native communities serving organizations across the Pacific, and that includes Guam, Saipan, American Samoa, Hawaii, and all of the eligible communities therein. And if you want to learn more about us, you can visit our website, anapacificbasin.org. And so on screen, I have a photo of a bunch of canoes from all across the Pacific, and this is actually from the Pacific Arts Festival a couple of years ago. And this was how communities in the Pacific used to trade their resources. And so, long before white contact, the Pacific Islanders were traveling thousands of miles between islands trading resources, and they had their cost principles for trade and for expenses, and we have ours in the federal government. And so that's kind of where we're going to be starting from. ANA, the Administration for Native Americans, is providing this free webinar for the nation. ANA promotes self-sufficiency for Native Americans by providing discretionary grant funding for community-based projects and training and technical assistance to eligible tribes. Back to where I was, the Administration for Native Americans, they have a vision statement, and that vision is that all Native communities are thriving. And so until that happens, they will be working tirelessly to fulfill this mission. And they certainly are doing that by offering this webinar. And their website is listed there on the slide, acf.hhs.gov/program/ANA. So we have some upcoming ANA webinars that you might want to check out. Every Thursday, we hold a nationwide webinar. All of our webinars are free. And the best way to sign up for those would be through the ANA website. You would go to the events page of the ANA website. Alternatively, you could go to one of the regional websites for whoever is hosting that session. And so next week, October 23rd, we'll be having a session on grant solutions hosted by Alaska, the Alaska TTA Center, and that should be good, especially if you're an existing grantee. On November 6th, we'll have a webinar on champions of native language, and we in the Pacific will be hosting that one, really just talking about different types of successful native language education projects from across the nation. And November 13th, the Alaska TTA Center will be presenting a session on the Alaska Native Settlement Claims Act, which is the unique Claims Act unique to the Alaska Natives, and so that would be interesting to check out. And so for today's webinar, we have three primary goals, and I'll be handing it off to our presenter right after this, but our main goals are to introduce people to the newly reorganized and consolidated 2 CFR Part 200, otherwise known as the Super Circular. And Susan, our presenter, will explain more about that soon. Our other goals are to review each of the subsections within that, those rules, and to kind of highlight some of the key changes from the previous regulations, which were spread among various different, slightly duplicative regular circulars. And so if you weren't familiar with the previous OMB circulars, then don't worry about that too much. We'll be explaining them from at a fundamental level But if you were familiar with the old regulations, then we will be pointing out key areas where they've changed. And so it should work for beginners and people who have some experience with this already. And then the last thing that we're going to be doing is highlighting the impact of these key changes to ANA specific processes and to the ANA grants. And so at this time, I'm going to be passing it off to our trainer, Susan White. Susan has decades of experience working with the federal government and specifically with budgets and federal cost principles. She's really a whiz at that. And Susan is the technical assistant specialist for the Pacific region and really the best resource for this. So at this time, I'm going to pass it off to Susan.
Okay, thank you, Matt. All right, so as Matt said, we're going to be talking about the super circular, or I've heard it called the Uber circular. What it actually is it's 2 CFR, and CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200. All right, and what happens is this is created, the 2 CFR Part 200. It then will go to HHS, or the Department of Health and Human Services, and they'll do their grants policy and that, and then it comes down to, and this is a new term, the NFE, which are non-federal entities. All right, so you're all non-federal entities with the exception of the representatives from the federal government. So we're going to be going through it, and it is new. It is new. Now, a lot of people said, why did they do this, or why did they change? Well, there's a couple of really good reasons why they changed. All right, the first thing is to kind of streamline everything. All right, before, when someone would ask me a question, it'd be like, you know, is this an allowable cost? And I'd have to say, are you representing a government, a tribe, or are you representing a nonprofit? You know, because everybody had their own set of rules. And they've really, really consolidated all of these into this new CFR, which I think is a very good thing. I think it's a very good thing. So that you can talk to anyone that gets federal funds, and you've all got the same set of rules now. Before, nonprofits talk to nonprofits, that's okay, but if you talk to a tribe, well, then there were some different rules. So that's real good. It reduces the administrative burden on grantees or on non-federal entities, all right? And the other reason is they want to reduce the risk of fraud, waste, and abuse. So those are the main reasons for it. Now, this took a long time in happening, too. I first heard about this about 7 years ago. So this has been in the works for quite a while. Okay. Basically, what it did is it combined 8 different circulars. When I say circulars, I'm talking about the regulations that, you know, govern the financial aspects of a grant or a cooperative agreement. Okay, and I've listed all 8 of them here for you. We all remember OMBA 102 and A110 for nonprofits, and then we had our cost principles somewhere else, and A87 for tribes, and 122 for nonprofits, and oh yeah, our audits are over here, and 133. It brought all of this together finally. So again, I think it's very, very good. Okay, and it is all now in 2 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200. So let's take a look at what some of the well, to me, some of the highlights are. And remember, you guys, I kind of get into this stuff. So if I get too excited about it, you know, just put up with me, all right? Okay, 1, there's a real emphasis on performance. Okay, there's a new emphasis on performance. And we can see this throughout the whole circular. And when I say circular, I'm referring to 2 CFR Part 200. You know, all of a sudden we have a new type of award called a fixed amount award. We always had that with contracts, but we didn't have it with grants and cooperative agreements. Okay, and it models, it mirrors the fixed price contracts that the government has had in the past. So they've brought that into the grant world for us. And what that is you negotiate an award amount, and you have to have certain deliverables. And if you meet those deliverables, you get whatever the amount of money is that's been agreed upon, okay, irregardless of cost. It's a double-edged sword. You know, 1, You know, you may do it under cost, but you also could do it over cost. So that's something to be real careful of. But we're not sure yet how this is going to be implemented and when it's going to be used and how it's going to be used. Again, all of this is new because we haven't seen the implementation yet. All right. And then it's also streamlined report requirements for salaries and wages, which provides more flexibility. Okay, I'm not sure how that's going to be implemented either because, you know, we're still going to have the financial management standards. So it'll be interesting to watch these things evolve as we move through them. The other thing that it does is it really strengthens oversight, okay, for both federal agencies, and in these new these new regulations, they speak quite a bit about pass-through entities. So I'm sure a lot of you receive money from a state, like the federal government gives it to the state and then the state passes it through to you. We see that with a lot of our block grants and with some of our aging money and things like that. Okay, they're speaking much more to pass-through entities. You're a pass-through entity at that point, right? So there is a lot of language surrounding subawards and pass-through entities throughout these regulations. One of the things they talk about is use existing audit information, which speaks to our audit and getting clean audits, okay? There's stronger language on disclosure of conflict of interest and criminal violations. We've always had that somewhere kind of in the background and addressed, but there's stronger language now. Expressly prohibits profit. We saw that within certain regulations, but not within all the regulations. We've always had requirement of certification by the senior officials. Okay, and it does give the federal agencies fairly strong remedies to address non-compliance. Very similar to what we saw with high risk in the past, only it has been expanded. Okay, so let's take a look at what this is. The super circular, which I've said about 8 times now, is 2 CFR Part 200. And it's broken down into 5 different parts. It was published last year on December 26th, 2013. All right. And again, I really want to emphasize this. We're going to be doing, you know, going over it. It's kind of the cliff notes of it. If you have any questions, please, please, please go directly to the regulations and read the full text of them. It's real important that it just be kind of a resource. You have it bookmarked and you refer to it quite a bit, especially over the next couple years as we see the implementation of it. Okay. So what we're going to be covering through the rest of this webinar is we're going to be talking about the financial management regulations. Remember those, the old financial management regs? They were in 2 CFR Part 74 and Part 92. Okay, we're going to be talking about the cost principles. Those were in A21, A87, and A122. And then the audit requirements for federal awards, which were in A133 and A50. So it's all together now in one spot. And that's what we're going to be doing. Right, so let's look at the 5 parts that we have to it. All right. Oh, and before this, let me give you my little spiel, because I think this is so important, you know, and we're entering a new time with these regulations. You know, these regulations are the rules. It's just like if you play basketball, there's rules that you have to follow to play the game. Okay, these are the rules that you follow in the world of grants and cooperative agreements and that. So it's pretty significant. It's pretty significant in my world anyway. So now let's look at the different parts. Part A is the acronyms and definitions, right? They've just brought it together. Part B is the general provisions. Remember, that used to be just one part in the old regulations. Part C is pre-award, pre-federal award requirements. We had those before. They've been expanded. Okay. Subpart D is the post-award or post-federal award requirements. This is our standards, and this is what we spend a whole lot of time on, all right, as we manage our grants. Then Part E is the cost principles. This we used to spend a lot of time making sure that everything we did was allowable within the cost principles. And Part F is the audit requirements. And I'm going to go through each one of these parts, you guys. All right? Some in more detail than others. All right? Like the definitions. Let's go through subpart A. This is the acronyms and definitions. And what they've done here is they've consolidated, you know, all the different definitions from every place. And they have, you know, and they've put them all in one place. And they're all standardized now. All right, they used to be all over the place. Now we can go to one place. And look at how I have this numbered, like 200.0 is acronyms, all right? And then 200.1 is where the definitions start. And the reason I put the numbers in here is so you would know where to go, you know, when you start reading 2 CFR Part 200, because I know you guys are all going to want to read it once we're done here. It's so interesting. But this will tell you where to go, especially if you're trying to look something up, all right? Now, they have expanded the definitions. They aren't as precise as they used to be, but that's because they have to encompass more now since everything is together. So I think that's also very good as well. We all have the same definition for the same term. Some of the definitions are like federal award. And what, you know, that's just, it could be the award document or it could be the money that you've been awarded. The non-federal entity, our new buzzword now, means either you're a state government, a local government, an Indian tribe, an institution of higher education, or a non-profit organization. And that applies both to recipients, direct recipients of the grants, or subrecipients. Okay? Pass-through entity, I already spoke to that. That's if you're a subrecipient or a subawardee. And then one thing, state, remember it used to say state, local government, or tribe. Now Indian tribes have their own definition, and that's under 200.54. Okay. But again, there's 99 different terms that are defined within this. Okay. Subrecipient, I already spoke to that. Contractor got normalized. We used to see vendor some places, contractor someplace else. Anyway, that's the definition. So, you know, when in doubt, look it up. The general provisions in Subpart B, all right, basically what they have here is they talk about how they've established these cost principles. It's kind of all of that new stuff, you know. They talk about, you know, when federal agencies can deviate from it. All right, and typically there's only really two instances where they can. Federal statute or executive order will take precedence, and then if OMB approves it. All right, so they're pretty good. They're pretty solid. They're going to be pretty solid once we get going on them. And I'm not going to speak too much more. They talk about what goes into, you know, the award documents and things like that. The pre-award, okay, this is before you ever get a grant or a cooperative agreement. What they talk about there is they talk about which instrument to use, what's appropriate. We all know the difference between grant agreements and cooperative agreements and contracts. They tell when it's appropriate to use each one. It speaks to, oh, and look at, like, see, we're in Part C and that's 200, all right? Part B was 100 and Part A was 0 to 99. Real important so that you can find what you need. All right. They talk about what goes in the notice of the funding opportunities. They do speak to federal agency review of merit. Okay, ANA's always done this, so that won't be anything new in the ANA world. They do speak to the federal agency review of risk. This, I think, we need to pay particular attention to, okay? Because federal agencies are to do a review of risk now before issuing an award. So we need to have, as a grantee, we need to have all our ducks in order. And, you know, in preparing to get those awards, because we all are successful, or hope we are successful. But what they're going to be looking at is your financial stability. So you need to have pretty good financial statements, you know. Management systems, key, everyone. You need to have good management systems in place, you know, your financial policies and procedures. You know, if you haven't looked at those in 5 or 10 years, dust them off and bring them up to date. Your personnel policies and procedures, those are your systems. And also make sure that, you know, you're following these systems. What frequently happens, and I'm as guilty as anyone of it, is that, you know, as we evolve, we kind of change procedures a little bit and we forget to update our policies and procedures. So I think it's real critical that now's a good time to take a look at them, because there are going to have to be some changes with the implementation of these regulations in many cases. They're going to look at history of performance. And I think this gives us a good opportunity as we get to the end of a grant or a project, maybe to write a couple pages about our performance on it, so we establish, you know, a historical document about our performance that we can provide to potential funders if they ever want to see it. I mean, you know, grants get over, you're excited, everything gets done, you know, but I think it's a real good time to write a review of that and keep that somewhere on file. And anyway, it's something to think about, something I've thought about. Your reports and your audit findings. Again, I am just a cheerleader for clean audits. And our reports too. Maybe we want to start thinking more about the content of our reports and the information that we're including in it. And then, of course, your ability to meet all the regulation requirements. So this is going to be, all federal agencies are going to have to do a review of risk from what the regulations state. Again, we haven't seen implementation yet, but that's in the regulations right now. So that's a key thing to me that happened with these regulations. All right. They also talk in the pre-award about I already said that, use of agreements. Special conditions. Special conditions was, remember the high-risk stuff for those of you that have been around the block a few times with grants? Okay, it's the old high-risk regulations. They have expanded that though. And then what is to be included in funding opportunities? And this is where you can go take a look at it. Okay, now this is the big one, Subpart D. This is the one we spent a ton of time on most of our lives if you've managed a lot of grants. Okay, and the biggest change I see to it is the first change out, and that's performance measurement. You're required to relate financial data to performance accomplishments. Yeah, I'm not sure how this is going to roll out. All right, there's certain grants or projects we have where it's very easy to do. There's others where it's more difficult to do. So it'll be interesting to see what's going to be required of us as we move forward with these new regulations. But there is a requirement that the grantee or the recipient relate financial data to performance accomplishments of the federal award. Lots of ways we can do that. Again, some are pretty clear-cut, others aren't. Okay? You do need to demonstrate that you're operating in a cost-effective manner. Okay, we saw a little bit of this with our A&E applications in the past where we, you know, in the budget section, we had to speak to cost efficiency and that. I think there's going to be more emphasis on that. And again, this is Susan talking because we haven't seen this implemented yet, you know, into doing that and start analyzing what are our unit costs. What does it cost us to, you know, train a language teacher? What does it cost us to deliver a unit of service? Something along those lines, right? And then the other one is they speak to the ability to share, to improve program outcomes, share lessons learned, spread the adoption of promising practices. You know, well, that hits me in the face that, you know, for all our projects, we need to be incorporating activities to write it up so that it could be replicated by other agencies. I mean, that just screams that at me, but I'm not sure what, you know, how that will roll out as we go through this. Okay, internal controls. We've always had to adhere to internal controls. Now they reference the standards for internal control. And the standards, excuse me, for internal control really have 5 basic areas, and I just noticed I left one out here. One is that your internal controls need to ensure that there's a risk assessment done, that you have control activities, you know, and that there's information, communication, and monitoring. The other one is that it's a controlled environment. Okay, like the environment, blank checks are locked up. Control activities, or there's 2 signatures, or you use purchase orders. You know, these are the standards for internal control that have been around for a while, but they do play, I read it as showing additional emphasis, although in our audits, they certainly emphasized it there in the past. Under payments, we've always had minimizing the time elapsing between the receipt and the disbursement of funds. That's not, you know, that has always been in the regulations. The internet earned, that should be interest earned. Typo, you guys. Okay, interest earned, they raised the threshold to $500. It used to be $125, I think, for governmentals and $250 for nonprofits. You get to keep that, the first $500 for administrative expenses, if you earn any additional interest on advances over $500, you have to send that back to the federal government. Okay, my biggest question there is, you get too much advance if you're making more than $500 in interest with interest rates where they are at today, you know. But, and then there, of course, they speak to putting the money in interest-bearing accounts. Those regulations really haven't changed, where they want it in interest-bearing accounts, with the exception of, you know, if you're going to generate, you know, less than, and I forget the dollar in interest, if it's going to cost too much, or if you have to maintain balances. But, you know, if you have a question about that, you know, go to the regulations. They really detail it out fairly well. Okay, cost sharing or matching. And again, see, we're in the 300s. It's at 306. This is pretty much, you know, what it's always been. Verifiable from your records, you know, from your accounting records. You can't include it for other federal awards. It has to be necessary and reasonable. Has to be allowable under the cost principles. It has to be to support the project. That's been around for a long time. Program income, okay, just one change that I saw there. There's 3 methods for treatment of program income. Deduction, which we always had. Addition, which we always had. Cost sharing or matching. Now, deduction is the default, and so we always want to make sure that it says that our program income is in addition. The one change I did see is if you are using program income as part of your non-federal share or your cost sharing or matching, and if they say you can use $10,000 of program income for that, and you generate $12,000, $2,000 will default to the deduction method, okay? I hadn't seen that explained in the past. It might have been there, I just had never noticed it in the past. You know, but again, we always try to get it in addition, you know. Okay, revision of budget and program plans. This hasn't changed too much at all. We, you know, if you have a change in the scope or the objective of the project, you need to go in for approval. Change in key personnel, okay, you need to go in for approval. If the key personnel are going to be absent for 3 months or 25% of time, again, that requires prior approval. The transfer of funds budgeted for participant support costs specifically, can't move a dime of that without getting approval. If you're going to start contracting out the work that you said you were going to do yourself, and then changes in cost sharing or matching. Now the other thing, and this is not different, but it says here, it's got a different slant to it. The federal awarding agency may restrict transfer of funds that exceeds 10% of the total budget. That says, but that has to be specific in the terms and conditions of your award, you know, and that. So I know that in the past, A&A had it at 25%. Okay, so we'll have to see how that rolls out when the guidance comes out on these from A&A. But that really didn't change too much. The 10% was always in the old OMB, A110 and 102. I know it was in one of the two or both. You know, in the past, A&A chose to put it at 25% to give you much more flexibility, which You know, and some agencies may say you can move what you want around. Highly unlikely, but it could happen. Okay, procurement standards. These tightened up not quite a bit, but they did tighten up a lot. Okay, one, we've always had to have procurement procedures, written procurement procedures. We've always had to have a code of conduct or a standard of conduct. Okay, that's not new. This really came out that purchases have to comply with your organization or your tribe's documented procedures. I'm not sure why this happened, except that in the past, I know we've seen a lot of audit findings that our procedures say we're going to do it one way and we're doing it another way. Maybe that's why it happened, I'm not sure. Purchases have to be necessary, we've always had that. Open competition, we've always had that. Conflict of interest policy, they really put a lot more language to it than we've seen in the past. It's there, it was always there before, but you know, now there's a lot more language to it. And then proper documentation for the purchases. Okay, and that was always there. You had to have a history of all procurement actions. Okay, now we got a big change coming up. There used to be 4 methods of procurement, now there's 5. All right, there's micro purchases. This is new. Okay, you can have micro purchases that are equal to or less than $3,000 in the aggregate per year. Okay, and those are very simple to buy. Small purchase procedures, they've increased the threshold to $150,000. So that would be between $3,000 and $150,000. And it's called the Simplified Acquisition Threshold. All right. It used to be $25,000 for nonprofits and $125,000 for governmentals. Okay, but I really want to caution all of you. That's the maximum you can go. And again, your policies and procedures have to reflect this. I know that I could never get through my board a small purchase being $145,000. You know, they're probably going to keep it at $25,000. And if that's where they keep it, that's what you adhere to. So again, it's going to be up to, you know, your governing board where those thresholds are going to fall. Okay, you're going to purchase something, and we don't do too much of this with A&A, but you know, see it a lot more with housing and some of the bigger programs. If it's over $150,000, if that's what your threshold is in your policies and procedures, you know, sealed bids, we've always had sealed bids where low bid wins. You know, we use that for when, you know, we're buying like computers and it meets the specs or something. We've always had competitive proposals where we want to use factors in addition to cost to evaluate the proposals that we get. The one thing they did do here, though, is they did add language to it that now you have to tell what the evaluation criteria is and what weight is placed on each evaluation criteria. And then always we've had the non-competitive purchases, the old sole sources, and it tells when you have to get prior approval on that. So they do spend a lot of time speaking to the prior approval of that. Right? So the micro purchase is the big change here. We now have 5 methods of procurement. And the threshold, you know, being the same for all non-federal entities, you know, and the raising of the threshold. Okay, financial reporting, that didn't change. You know, it's pretty much the same that agencies can require financial reporting as frequently as quarterly and as infrequently as annually. They still speak to the FFR or the SF 425 as being the financial report. It's still due 30 days and 90 days for the annual, okay? Monitoring and reporting program performance, again, that hasn't changed that much. Same type of frequency as financial, same type of deadlines as financial. All right. So, you know, the reports that are used require OMB approval. Records retention, that hasn't changed that much, but there is a lot more language around records in these new regulations, okay? It's still 3 years from when you file your final financial status report, is provided that all audits are closed, you're not in litigation or anything on audits, and 3 years from when you dispose of equipment, still the same type of requirements as we've always had. All right, but a lot of language about around the records that we didn't have before. They too talk about the methods for collection, transmission, and storage of information. All right, and this is new. You know, they talk about how you collect it, how you transmit it if you have to give it, and where it's to be stored. Okay, they talk about transmitting it to the federal government, and that one I'm really curious about, because that one I really don't have a good basis to see where it's, you know, how it's going to roll out. Okay, and they do encourage that you use open machine readable formats. Matt will have to tell you what an open machine readable format is. I have no clue. Okay, and then they do speak to termination of the award and closeout. Okay. Okay, Subpart E is the cost principles. We're going to go in there next. And, you know, and we're in 400s now, 200 to 400s, okay? Determining the allowability of costs. Okay, and this is pretty much the same. They have to be necessary and reasonable. Okay, conform to cost principles of the federal award. Be accorded consistent treatment. You know, they have to comply with GAAP and be adequately documented. We always had that. Okay, as far as indirect goes, they do speak a lot more to indirect. Remember, we used to have it in some of the, well, you guys probably don't read the circulars like me, but some of them had it, some of them didn't. Now they do speak to indirect, and then they even go into further define it in the appendices. And we're not going to hit on indirect because that just, well, we could talk about indirect for the next 2 days. All right, but they do speak to it for each one of the different types of non-federal entities. Okay. And they speak about, oh, there's some good stuff that happened here too with indirect. One, they did all the changes to reduce the administrative burden, which was a goal of these regulations. Okay, they do allow for one extension up to 4 years or on any current indirect cost rate, which is really nice because some of the times it takes a while to get those rates negotiated. But here's the big thing. For smaller organizations that do not have an indirect cost rate, they allow for a de minimis, and I'm probably pronouncing that, rate of 10%. So I'm very anxious to see that, where if they don't, you know, they don't have to go through the whole, I'm assuming they don't have to go through the whole proposal process and negotiation process, but because it is, you know, a very cost-effective rate, you can claim that. You'll still have to have the expenses, you know, to support it moving forward and for your audits, but that would be very nice for the smaller organizations, all right, that don't have big complex rates to work with. Okay, they also speak to costs and how you have to make the best use of resources. And that would be like at conferences, they do, you know, say that there has, you know, it's still an allowable cost, but again, they're watching the cost real closely. We've seen this over the past few years where there's a number of approvals that have to be done before we can have conferences anymore. They're going to look probably at morale costs, you know, health and morale costs for employees. Not sure how that'll roll out. Relocation costs. I'm really not familiar with paying the cost of relocation and student activities. And the other thing that's really good, though, is that they do speak into conferences, you know, having family-friendly policies, you know, where if you are having a conference to have childcare resources available, you can't pay for them, but to have them available so that people can participate in it if they do have small children and that. And then they do speak to tribes, children, and the elderly. And again, we're just going to have to get further definitions on that. I really, you know, that one's real hard till we see it actually roll out. Okay. Now, they do have the selected items of cost, okay, and it's still allowable with prior approval, and not allowable, all right? And they really haven't changed that much, or I didn't see any changes, to be honest with you, except some that used to require prior approval for nonprofits now are allowable. They used to be allowable for governmentals. They did standardize everything. So this is really good. Instead of having 3 columns, if you're a nonprofit, it's allowable. If you're a governmental, it's allowable with approval. Now there's just one rule for all of them. And it's, you know, like for the allowable training, depreciation costs, transportation costs, those have always been allowable. Prior approval, equipment is defined at $5,000, and that's still in the regs. I didn't speak to that because that hasn't changed very much. You know, rearrangement or reconversion, that still requires prior approval. Alcohol is still not allowable, bad debt, contributions, or donations. But there's a whole list of selected items of cost. And again, if you have a question about any costs, I strongly recommend that you go to the regulations, because in some cases, like with advertising, it's allowable if you're advertising for a new hire or you're advertising for a procurement solicitation. It requires prior approval for certain other things and is not allowable for other things. So you really need to look at your individual case and what you're working with there. Right, and then the last part is Subpart F, the audit requirements. And I'm not going to speak too much to this simply because I'm not an auditor and don't feel comfortable with it. The one thing they did do, though, is they raised the threshold for audits. Okay, it used to be if you expended $500,000 in federal funds, all right, then you are required to do a single audit. But now they've raised that threshold to $750,000. And that's not per grant. That means total for the tribe or the organization. That $750,000 could be made up of 4 different grants. So remember that. And they have to be done every year. There's 2 exceptions to that. One is if you are a state, local government, or Indian tribe that's required by Constitution or statute, in effect on January 1st, 1987, to undergo its audits less frequently than annually, then you can go to biennial audits. Or if you are a nonprofit that had biennial audits between July 1st, 1992 and January 1st, 1995. Okay, you guys, those are the 2 exceptions to it. All right. It's probably just easier to get your audits done. Okay. Now your audits is still the same. You have 30 days to submit it from when you get the audit report, or within 9 months after the end of the audit period. Okay. And so that really hasn't changed at all. Then with audits, what it does is that audit requirements, they focus on the greatest risks of waste, fraud, and abuse. Federal agencies should rely on single audit. The audits are to be made public, is my understanding, but I'm not sure. Or maybe they could be requested under the Freedom of Information Act. Tribes can opt out of that, though. There is a provision for tribes to opt out of their audit being made public. And then, you know, they speak to a cooperative approach in audit resolution and oversight by the feds where there's the most risk. So I would say that's the highest, you know, dollar threshold or programs along that. And again, an auditor can speak to this much better than I can. Okay. Now, when the federal agencies are required to implement this is December 26, 2014. It's exactly 1 year after it was published. It will apply to awards made on or after that date. So the next round of awards from A&A it will apply to. Okay, continuation awards, that's up to the agency when they're going to implement. So if you're in the first year of your grant and the second year, we're just going to have to wait and see what ANA does, right? Okay. And then for audits, it applies on fiscal years that begin on or after December 26th. So for those of you that are on a calendar year, your audit for 2015, it will apply. It'll start applying to those audits. All right. Okay. And again, we're going to get the guidance after around December 26th of this year. And I think a lot of these questions will be answered and we'll get real clear guidance on implementation and that. To me, it's really important to establish good internal controls. Okay, I think that's going to be looked at very, very closely. Okay, I think also procurement is going to be looked at very closely, and it's real important to get good procurement systems in place. And this is Susan White talking, but I do feel this way. Okay. And of course, I'm a broken record when I talk about, clean audits are important. All right. And then we've always known that successful implementation of our projects, they're important for continued funding, but they're even more important for our communities. So in summary, this is what happened. There's one set of regulations for all non-federal entities, which is all of us. I think the new regulations do clarify a number of areas, which I find very, very good, because every time you get a different interpretation, you have to deal with something differently. Risk assessments will be conducted prior to grant awards. Okay, so we need to just prepare our own internal systems for dealing with that, and how we keep it. We have to relate performance accomplishments to financial data. Okay, I'm pretty excited. There's a new type of award, a fixed amount awards. I can hardly wait to see that. Oh, and the other thing is and I should have spoken to this, and I didn't speak to this enough. Intellectual property is addressed in detail now. They talk a lot about copyrights, patents, and those types of things, which they weren't spoken to in detail in the past. And it's coming up more and more. And they talk about when the federal government has use of it and at no cost and when they can use it. So they've really, really put a lot of additional information around that. And that's what I got for you, everyone. Okay. So, we got any questions?
Yeah, so we actually have a lot of questions that were coming in during the session.
Okay. Let's take a look.
Read some of those to you starting from the top, Susan. So the first question that we got was, at what level will risk be assessed? Will it be at the organizational level or the departmental level?
Kate, I really don't. I would think it would be at the organizational level, but I'm just talking through my hat right now. I think we're going to have to see implementation. We're going to have to see these things implemented. I really apologize. I can't speak to that better, but my gut tells me it's going to be organizational, but who knows? It might be departmental. I'm sorry. We'll all know December 26th, I think.
Okay, the next question comes from Dan. These regs are now a part of CFR text. However, HHS hasn't created its version of how to CFR will be implemented at the HHS ANA level. How do we think that will happen, and what set of regs will be used in the coming round of full?
Okay, Mr. Dan. Basically, I know that ACF has submitted, their implementation, and it's at OMB right now. It has to be done by December 26, 2014, and I think that's when we're going to find this stuff out. Okay. That's when we're going to, if we look at what the regs say, it says any awards after December 26, 2014. Now, I don't know. We don't know. I mean, it could be that OMB is so overwhelmed with all the agencies issuing these that they put an extension on it. I can't answer that. Okay.
Right. Let's see. So Anthony had a question about whether or not the new procurement thresholds include freight and shipping costs, and actually Camille kind of offered an answer to that regarding acquisition costs and ancillary changes, which is in that chat box
Yeah,
there.
that's absolutely correct. Camille's nail on the head, Camille.
Okay. Um, okay, and then Kate had a question about if extensions were per grant or per grantee.
Is that for indirect cost, Kate? If it is, it would be per grantee, because your indirect cost is an organizational indirect cost. It's not on a grant by grant basis, if I'm understanding what your question is.
Yeah, and for any of you who have asked the question, if you want to clarify that or follow up, you can just type into the chat box as Susan answers it. So the next question we have was from Celia, and Celia asks, some agencies do not accept indirect costs that are a year old. How would this apply?
Well, so yeah, that's true. Most agencies don't accept costs that are a year old, and that's where it'll be interesting to see what that one-time exception for up to 4 years, how that's implemented. Because I don't know about you guys, but even if I get my proposal in on time, by the time they negotiate it, I'm usually a couple months out on my rate. So hopefully with this extension, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I think we can get the extension, and maybe that will help them to clear up the backlog, because I know those poor financial divisions that have to negotiate them are really backlogged, but we're just going to have to see. I wish I had an answer. I don't, but at least there is a provision for an extension now. So we never had that in the past.
Susan? Okay, our next question comes from Beth, and Beth asks, what are considered allowable with prior approval organizational costs?
There's different costs within the Circular 2 CFR Part 200. Okay, and so allowable with prior approval, typically, and I want to say I'm not a federal agency, if you have it in your proposal and it's approved, okay, that constitutes prior approval. Say it's like a piece of equipment, okay, and it's approved, that constitutes prior approval. Now, we've seen in the past where BIA says even if it's in your proposal, you have to come in again. But most agencies, if they approve it in the proposal. If not, say that you're halfway through your grant and you find you need to buy a piece of equipment, okay, then you would have to go into your funding agency and request prior approval and show them where the money's going to come from. Okay, or, because if it wasn't in your original budget, you're going to have to pull the money from some other line item.
Thanks. The next question comes from Melissa. Are we advised to include the cost of audits in our proposed grant budget request?
Oh, that depends upon agency, or your organization, or your tribe. Now, if it's a cost that's included in indirect, it wouldn't be in your direct costs. If you direct cost audits, and if your organization spends $750,000 or higher after this year, in the past it was $500,000, then the portion of the audit can be put in. If you're not required to have a 133 audit, my understanding, and it speaks to it in the regulations, and I'd have to go look at it, if you're not required to have it, then they don't approve the cost. But you would put, if it's a direct cost and not part of your indirect cost pool, then you would put, like, say that you have $1 million budget and your program is 100,000, your program could pay for 10% of the cost of that audit.
Okay. The next question comes from Clifford Guzman. If we do not expend more than budgeted during a program year, is an audit still required?
Oh, okay. So if you don't spend more than 750,000 in the, or 500,000 now, 750,000 for audits after December 26, no, it's not required.
Thanks. The next question comes from Jilla, and I think I can take this. Is there a link to the text of the super circular? Yes, there is. That's going to be on the eCFR directory in GPO. And I'll send that out to everyone who registered for this session using the email addresses that you registered with. Along with that email, we're going to have a survey, as well as some other resources that we'll touch on right after this Q&A session. The next, oh, and she asked how to navigate that. You'll just scroll down to read through it, or you can do like a Command F or Control F to do a find function and just look for the words that you're searching for. That's pretty helpful. Okay.
And Jilla, that's why I gave you the references too, Jilla, where I said 200.104, 200.406. Those references should help you as well.
Yeah, and you could look just for those. Beth asks, will no cost extensions be affected by the new super circular in any way?
You know, Beth, when I looked at it, I didn't see where they would at all. You know, you still have to get prior approval, but I didn't see anything that hit my attention. Again, we're going to have to look at how these regs get implemented, but nothing stood out to me at all. Because I was looking at that for, you know, no cost extensions, carryover, that type of thing.
Thank you. Okay, so Kate asks, can you explain how financial data will be used to evaluate program performance accomplishments? For example, a program that does not involve any revenue.
Ooh, Kate, you're going to have to explain that to me. So there's no grant revenue at all? Because, you know, you wouldn't have to because you're not getting any federal dollars at that point. So I don't think I'm understanding your question.
You see that, Susan? A grant, but the program itself may not generate any revenue.
Oh, okay. Okay, I gotcha. Yeah. They're not talking about program income. They're talking about relating performance and financial data together for grant income. So that's what I was speaking to, Kate, where I'm not really sure how that's going to roll out. I know that, you know, like the training of a language teacher may cost $10,000. Maybe you can do something that way. You're going to have to look at the deliverables and then what the cost is for those deliverables. But we're going to really need a lot of guidance from our federal agencies on how they want to see that, because I really don't know precedents for that or anything that I can relate it to, except for some of the programs, you know, that had, you know, like weatherization, you could spend, you know, $2,500 per house, that kind of stuff. So I really think we're going to have to watch that one, and we're going to have to start thinking in our own minds, because we put in our A&A proposals benefits expected, you know, and results. Okay, is that a measurable unit? If so, can we attach a dollar value to it? That's the big question mark for me in these whole regulations.
Thanks, Susan. And there's one question from Shanna. She might want to follow up on this. Can you speak on the changes to vendor versus contractor language?
What they're talking about is they give you a definition of contractor, Now, it used to be if you had a specific contract in place, a contract instrument in place. Now they're talking about a contractor based on what they're doing, irregardless of what type of agreement you have in place. And typically a contractor, and again, let's look at the regs but in my world and my understanding is a contractor is, if you're buying something, you know the scope of work of the contract, you know the exact dollar amount, you know who you're contracting with. They used to, and they referred to the audit stuff when they talked about as a contractor as referenced in audit. A vendor to me is somebody I buy someone from. So I guess we're going to have to look at all our vendors and make sure that they're not really contractors. I think in the case of A&A, we don't have the kind of buying that we have like with some of our HUD programs and that type of thing. So, to me, it's just a definitional thing. In reading the regs and interpreting them, what it looked like to me is that they don't want people not to call somebody contractors when they're actually doing contract type work. But again, I think that's more for some of our construction grants and stuff like that, where that really comes into play. A&A doesn't have a lot of that going on.
Thanks, Susan. Gila has kind of a question. She says that she was in a regional talk with HUD about this circular 2 months ago, and she wanted to know if how applicable these sections of the super circular are to other agencies or to other specific agencies.
This is it, you guys. All agencies are to comply with it.
Right. And then Dan has a question or a statement. I think use of pre-post assessment scales and other similar tools for measuring non-quantifiable outcomes will be a big piece of fixed price outcome-based grants.
Oh, that's that new type of award. So yeah, that's really, that's going to be interesting to see how that rolls out, Dan.
Okay, so we might have time for one more question. Oh, and here it is from Kahi Brooks Richards. She asks, Aloha, can we have a training for small grassroots non-federal entities to ensure we are in compliance or prepared for new regulations, risk assessment and stuff? And I think Kahi, especially for existing grantees who might be worried about how this might affect them, if anyone has questions specific to your organization, I think the best thing to do would be to contact your regional TTA center, and then we can work with you individually to offer some technical assistance to help make sure that you're in compliance. And each of you should know which regional TTA center is yours. I'll type in all of the web addresses to the various regional centers. And I think that's all the time we have actually for question and answers. So at this time, we'll move to close the webinar. And so our goals today were to introduce people to the new CFR, 2 CFR Part 200, and I think Susan did a good job of that. She went through all of the subsections and highlighted some key changes from the previous versions. And she also highlighted some of the ways that this might impact ANA or general HHS processes, and there is still time for them to come into compliance with this newly reorganized super circular, and then that's until December 26th, right, Susan?
Well, that's when the federal agencies will begin implementing it, but the time to get ready is now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So you're going to have to be implementing once you get guidance. But I'd start looking at my stuff right now.
Via email, and we'll be sending these out to the emails that you use to register with. Included in that email will be a summary handout PDF that'll be attached to the email. It includes a summary outline of everything that we covered today, as well as a table of costs. And each cost will be classified as either allowable, not allowable, or allowable with approval. And it includes a lot of different costs, and so that'd be a good reference for you. We'll also include a direct link to the online version of this of the codes that we were citing today, and so you'll be able to get that online version and search through it for whatever kind of words you're looking for. And this last website down here for the Council on Financial Assistance Reform can provide some additional resources. Susan, do you want to talk about that that resource in particular?
Now that's if you're hardcore and really want to see, you know, how this reform came about and things like that. That's kind of the council that made all the recommendations and stuff. You know, I think the GPOE CFR, that's your site, you guys, when you want to go check things out. The summary is kind of the cliff notes to help you get in the right place, but you know, I strongly recommend if you have a question, go straight to the regulations. Hopefully this other information is just to help you get to the right place and add some clarity. It's, like I said, cliff notes. Hardcore Council on Financial Assistance Reform. You'll probably want to look at that and see why they made the decisions they did.
Thanks, Susan. And in addition to these things, I'll also be posting a link where you can download the PowerPoint we used today. And the PowerPoint's a kind of a bigger file, so I'm not going to be able to attach it. But if you just click on that link, it'll take you to a Google Drive page where you'll be able to download the entire PowerPoint to your computer. And if you have any other questions, you can contact us. Susan's email address is there on the screen, susan@kananiao.com. And our office phone number is also there, 808-485-8182. And let me type our toll-free number into the chat box now. But if you have questions, you can call us or email us, and we can get back to you as soon as possible. And I'm going to end the recording now, but a recording of this session will be made available in about a week and a half and will be posted to YouTube, our regional website, and likely the resources page of the ANA website. So thank you once again for joining us for today's webinar, Intro to the Super Circular. Hope you got a lot out of it. And Susan, do you want to give any closing words?
No, I think we're all going to find this stuff out together, you guys. So if you guys let me know if you run into any hot tips or that. To me, it's kind of exciting because we haven't seen these kind of changes in 20 years. And Matt, I wanted to tell you, the decades of experience comment did not go unnoticed. But yeah, this is the biggest changes I've seen in my decades of experience. So thanks, everyone. I know it's not the most exciting stuff, but it's really important. It's the rules of our game of grants. So good luck.
Bye, everyone.